Okay, so when we left off, we were about halfway through our first materials, lecture one. Now we're looking at continuing into that formation of the agency relationship. So we looked at, in the last materials, we looked at sort of a reasonableness standard for when we create this agency through the actions of the principal. Um, Sometimes agencies occur just out of necessity. Oftentimes, if there's an emergency and a family member has to be appointed to make a decision, for example, for a health reason, that can be um, an operation of law type agency that is formed based on a necessity, and the law recognizes that. Oops, sorry about that. Clicking too fast. Okay, the agent's duties to the principal. So what does the agency have to do? Agent have to do? Well, perform is the key one, right? So our agent has to use, and we see that term reasonable sneak in, reasonable diligence, reasonable skill. If the agent fails, there could be a liability for breach of contract. So this is where you study contract first, and agency law is embedded into contracts. That's to set up that principal agent relationship. Oftentimes it's set up through a contract law. Um, some of the things that our agent must do is owe a standard of care. A gratuitous agent, here, if the agent's serving for free, the agent can only be sued or liable if there's a tort action. So a tort action would be like you're studying the defamations and the torts where we have a wrong alleged, a civil wrong alleged against our agent. Notification is required, so we have to tell our principal, essentially keep the principal in the loop of what's going on. And the law is going to assume that that takes place, that the principal should be checking in with the agent should be checking in with the principal. A duty of loyalty. So if you're hired as an agent, you have to act as in solely for the benefit of the principal. So you can't, for example, a lot of times in negotiations, if you're negotiating on behalf of a principal, you can't also have a relationship on the side with a third party that promises you a certain percentage back of the fee of the transaction. So the concern there is that our agent really does act on behalf of the principal. Confidentiality, a big piece. So in part of loyalty really is that we have to, for example, if a principal doesn't want to be disclosed to a buyer, our agent has to respect that and honor that those wishes. In the world of loyalty, the other thing to note really is that there can't be any hidden agenda of this agent. So we talked about maybe getting a cutback of some sort. That's sort of the same idea with loyalty, just a little more expanded. And the duty of obedience. So the agent must follow the law, and then also must follow the instructions of the principal. Agent is required to keep an accounting of transactions. So if funds are being received or paid out on behalf of the principal, the agent must be able to provide an accounting of those records. And those records should be prepared at any time the principal can request to see those. Now we're going to switch gears. So we've talked a little bit about the agent, some of the things the agent must do. For the principal has some key things of duties that are owed back to the agent. So the principal, if it's in the contract, must actually pay the compensation. So although an agent can be gratuitous, can receive no payment, if payment has been promised, the principal must compensate for that payment. If the agent's incurring fees, the agent must be reimbursed by the principal. So the principal takes on the responsibility to make sure that the agent's costs are covered, as long as the underlying actions are lawful and they were authorized by the principal. The principal has a duty of cooperation. This one doesn't come up too much in the law, but basically the principal can't try to make the agent fail at whatever task was given. So maybe the principal decides he or she doesn't want to pay the agent, so they sabotage a business transaction. That would really be where we see that cooperation issue come up in the law. The principal also is required to make sure it's a safe working condition for the agent. And that extends not just to the agent, obviously, but also beyond to the employees. Our rights and remedies. So what can happen if there's a lawsuit? Our agent has the right to payment if it's been promised, to be reimbursed, but then also indemnified, and a safe work environment. So all of these things are sort of promised to the agent, and if they're not fulfilled, then our agent can sue the principal for payment or reimbursement. The agent, if the rights of an agent are violated, the agent can withhold performance, and the agent may also request an accounting note from the principal side as well. So if the agent has a suspicion that the principal isn't acting and fulfilling the duties, the agent can say, look, I'm not performing until you give me some reassurance here. I'd like to see an accounting of, for example, maybe I'm not sure you have the funds to pay me, so I'd like to see that you have the funds on hand to pay me at the end of this transaction. That demand for an accounting, so say I must see these books and records, the agent has every right to say, I'm not going to do, kind of wanted to touch on that for another minute. Agents can say to the principal, I'm not comfortable with either what you've asked me to do, or I'm not comfortable that you'll be able to pay me the fee that I'll be entitled to. The agent can ask for additional information from that principal before he or she acts, the agent acts. And that's kind of a key right that's exercised by our agents when something about this transaction with the principal leads the agent to believe that a right is being violated, or that there's a concern about potential rights in the future being violated. For example, the right of compensation may not be fulfilled. The principal agency relationship, if it's not set up through a contract, so if it's an implied one or an agency by estoppel, or a ratification issue, the agent can't ask for specific performance. So the agent can't always recover for past services that have been rendered and damages, but the agent can't force the principal to retain the agent as an agent. So the agent isn't allowed to there isn't a transaction where we can force that principal to keep the agent hired, and that's kind of goes along with our employment law concepts of employment at will. That same thing would apply in the agency setting. If our agent acts in a way that misrepresents the nature of the relationship, is negligent, commits tort acts of libel, slander, trespass, if the agent's deceitful, if those facts are proven, then we would see a breach of that fiduciary duty. So if the agent is the one breaching, the principal does have a right to terminate the relationship. If our agent does breach, the principal does have a right to avoid the contractual relationship. So the principal, if the principal sees a breach from the agent, the principal isn't forced to compensate until the matter in the suit goes forward and perhaps is settled in the principal's favor, if we find that our agent failed to complete his or her duties. Now, typically, the principal is liable to cover the costs of an agent. So if the agent incurs costs, the principal, we use this term indemnification. It's the idea that where we have an obligation to pay back a party that incurred a cost on our behalf. Well, it's possible that the principal could say, look, agent, you are acting way outside the scope of what you're supposed to do. So the principal can actually sue the agent to recover damages if the principal is sued. So that's a pretty narrow exception of when our principal can actually go after the agent. But if we see that the agent is violated the instructions, then our principal can, if the principal is sued in a lawsuit and the principal loses and has to pay out damages to a third party, principal can turn around and sue the agent to recover those damages if the agent was acting outside the scope, either as a negligent agent or just violated the instructions of the agent. Okay, so that's sort of our introduction to how we form an agency relationship. We'll have some more lectures here shortly on the liability and terminations. Thank you.